Hey guys! Today we'll be covering a 2022 romance film called Love Can't Be Said. At the start of the movie, the protagonist Tong Chilio is narrating her story. She is a nerdy bespectacled veterinarian student in her 4th year who shares a dormitory with 3 of her friends. Tong has been secretly in love with a Taiwanese exchange student, Gu Bin, for several years, but hasn't had the courage to express her feelings for him. Instead, for the past 4 years, she has written all of her feelings into unsent letters. Tong is always early to reach the library and occupy her favorite spot, where she can directly see Gu Bin's dorm room. It is day 109 before graduation, and Tong is walking by the university garden while munching on an apple. She meets Gu Bin by chance when he saves her from tripping over a bicycle in front of a wax apple tree. Out of the blue, he then grabs her apple and takes a bite out of it. However, since he ate the fruit without asking, Gu Bin climbs up the wax apple tree to get another one for Tong. He then gives her the fruit, along with a small note. Sadly, just when the atmosphere between the two starts to heat up, a teacher interrupts him and scolds Gu Bin for climbing the wax tree, prompting him to run away. Later, Tong sits in the library and looks at Gu Bin's gift from earlier. However, she cannot understand what's written on the note. Therefore, she asks Miss Guo, the elderly librarian. The latter reveals that the note says thank you in Taiwanese. Tong mentions that the note was given to her by a Taiwanese friend, so it makes sense. Hearing this, Miss Guo asks her a favor. She has to decode an address that's written in Taiwanese language, but she can't seem to do it herself. So, she asks Tong for her friend's help. In the next scene, we see Tong outside Gu Bin's room, trying her best to gather courage and talk to him. Gu Bin sees her and invites her in. Tong is understandably nervous around her crush, so she hurriedly hands him the address that Mrs. Guo gave her. She explains that Mrs. Guo has been sending letters to the said address in Taipei, but no one has gotten back to her. To her delight, Gu Bin agrees to decode the address and trace it in Taipei, but before he can say anything else, a nervous Tong quickly leaves the room. Later that night, Tong writes her 93rd letter to Gu Bin, mentioning the day and how they had a chance meeting, which was very different from how she had imagined it to be. Just then, Fong Lu, one of her roommates, enters the dorm and slouches over Tong's shoulder. It turns out that her boyfriend just broke up with her. Being the nice person that she is, Tong extends her kindness and support to Fong Lu. The following morning, she wakes up to find that the letter from the other night is missing. Panicked, she searches for it all over her table, but to no avail. It turns out that Fong Lu, who is always urging her to be more forceful, has sent the letter to Gu Bin. After learning this, a panicked Tong immediately rides down to Gu Bin's place. She manages to seize the letter, pretending it was misdelivered and that it was actually there for Gu Bin's friend, Zhou Hanxiao, who lives in the dorm next door. Later that night, Tong realizes that she will never be able to express her feelings for Gu Bin, as they will be parting ways soon anyway. In the background, she narrates that the only thing that is making her happy right now is that Fong Lu got a new boyfriend. The movie jumps to 99 days before graduation. Gu Bin and Zhou come to ask Tong's advice about a sick cat they found. Soon, Gu Bin asks her out to the cinema, but a nervous Tong declines, saying that she has some assignments to complete. However, later, as she is discussing this with her best friend, Fong Lu, the latter encourages her to seize the opportunity. After a lot of deliberation, Tong finally agrees to attend the show. With her friend's encouragement fueling her courage, Tong is determined to grab Gu Bin's attention. She even pretends to feel cold, hoping Gu Bin will provide her with his jacket. But just then, she notices Fong Lu's boyfriend, Qin Fei Fan, kissing another woman. Fei Fan lied to Fong Lu, saying that he had some overtime work, so he couldn't spend the evening with her. After seeing Tong, he flees the movie hall. Tong follows him to a club where she manages to record a video of Fei Fan and the other woman. However, the other woman notices Tong and starts a fight with her. Just when she is about to slap Tong, Gu Bin comes to the rescue. While Gu Bin wrestles with Fei Fan, Tong and the other woman are engaged in a catfight. After a while, Zhou joins in, outnumbering Fei Fan and his girlfriend. However, before a side wins, security arrives at the scene, prompting Tong, Gu Bin, and Zhou to leave the scene. Shortly after, the trio arrives at Gu Bin's studio, and while Zhou falls asleep on the couch, the other two take care of one another's wounds. Tong wonders if she should send the video of Fei Fan cheating to Fong Lu, but also worries that this might destroy her best friend. However, when Gu Bin tells her that it's better to reveal the truth, she sends the video to Fong Lu through his phone. This interaction forms a romantic bond, and the two start getting close. It's 79 days before graduation. Tong and Gu Bin visit the age librarian Mrs. Guo, and Gu Bin offers to help her find the address in Taipei that she's been writing to. The address is of an old friend that Mrs. Guo once fancied back in 1987 before he suddenly disappeared. While everyone is discussing the matter, Tong smells something burning in the kitchen. It turns out that lunch is destroyed, so she decides to prepare a new meal. In the kitchen, Gubin realizes that Tong is a good cook, so he compliments her. She reveals that ever since her parents divorced, she had no choice but to look after herself. They then sit for lunch together, where Mrs. Guo explains more about her letter. She used to like a guy back in her days, but never confessed her feelings. Instead, she wrote letters to him. When she finally had the courage to confess, it was too late. A few years later, however, she got a letter from him along with a vinyl record. But since it was wartime, the letter had been partially destroyed. She could only see the address and a small portion of the letter. Her crush had mentioned a song that reminded him of her. Unfortunately, when she tried to play the vinyl record to listen to the song, it was damaged too. While returning home, Gubin suggests they write a letter back to Miss Guo, pretending that it's from her man. However, Tong thinks that it would be wrong and that it would go very badly if she were ever to find out about it. Gubin reasons that Mrs. Guo doesn't have much longer to live, so the least they could do is let her live without regret. Instead of writing a letter, the pair settle on searching for the song that was mentioned in Mrs. Guo's letter. So they visit record stores, hoping to find the song. Eventually, they come across an old video store at the corner of the street and find what they need. In the next scene, we find Miss Guo finally dancing in peace as she listens to the song that her crush mentioned long ago. Later that evening, Tong and Gubin sit together for dinner as they celebrate the success of making the old librarian happy and content. Tong says that Mrs. Guo's story resonates since she too cannot confess her feelings for the one she loves. On the other hand, Gubin still believes that Tong is in love with his friend Joe, so he sets up a date for the two. However, the following day, Joe mentions that he is in love with someone else, so Tong shouldn't waste her time. In turn, she also reveals that she too has someone else in her heart. One day, Tong notices Gubin going somewhere, so she follows him. They meet halfway, and Gubin reveals that he has been applying for jobs since graduation is near. He is currently working on a landscape project, which he hopes will land him his dream job. When Gubin asks what she plans to do after graduation, Tong reveals that she might not be able to graduate this year since she failed to conduct her surgical exam on an animal. Because of her appendicitis, her hand trembled during the operation, so she mistakenly cut too deep. If she cannot do the operation for the final test, she might have to stay back a year. As days pass by, Tong and Gubin's friendship grows deeper as they motivate each other every day. Gubin finishes designing his project, while Tong successfully operates on an animal and passes her test. As graduation approaches, Tong keeps getting closer to declaring her feelings to Gubin, but never does. It's 49 days before graduation. Fong Lu continues nagging Tong to declare her feelings. That day, they visit the amusement park with Gubin and Joe. Tong tries her best to manage private time with Gubin. When they're alone, Tong decides to finally speak up, but suddenly, Gubin feels a sharp blow to his head, making him seemingly uncomfortable for a while. However, he manages to get back in shape and act as if nothing happened to him. Later, he takes Tong to his special place, while Fong Lu and Joe take a cab and return to their rooms. Tong is taken aback when she sees her crush's special place. It is filled with glittering lights and lots of plants that look like something out of a fairy tale. She believes this is the right time to confess, so she tells Gubin that she has written a letter for him. Next, Tong begins reading her letter aloud, mentioning the time she first fell in love with him. She also talks about how she would try to bump into him in the cafeteria or take classes just to be by his side. As she is reading the letter, we see flashbacks of the scenes. Sadly, Gubin responds by saying that he just wants to stay friends and enjoy his life, as he is going back to Taipei after graduating. Hearing this, Tong starts crying as she realizes that Gubin never saw her as anything more than a friend. The next scene shows Tong spending her days alone in the rain and in her dorm bed, crippled by sadness and rejection. It's finally graduation day, but Tong's life is as mundane as it has been for the last few days. While her friends are celebrating, Tong sits alone in her room. Later, when she is passing by the boys' dormitory, she sees the project designed and made by Gubin and realizes that it is a dedication to her. She immediately rushes to his room but finds it empty. Joe informs her that Gubin is at the airport. Wasting no time, Tong goes to the airport and finally spots Gubin. She calls out to him and tells him that she loves him a lot. However, to her dismay, Gubin again rejects her. The movie then skips to a year after graduation when Tong and her friends meet up after a long time apart. Tong is now the founder of an animal rescue organization, while Fong Lu and Joe are dating. Sadly, Ms. Guo didn't survive the summer. After dinner, Tong stops by Gubin's special place and reminisces about her time with him. Just then, she notices a letter in an old letterbox nearby. She opens the letter and surprisingly learns that Gu Bin did like her. He had noticed her on the first day of university, and ever since then, he couldn't get his mind off of her. As Tong did, he too would take elective courses hoping to be in her class. Through the letter, he tells her that he loves her, but he just couldn't confess it. It's because he was diagnosed with brain tumors. He wanted to live the rest of his days happy and peaceful. He didn't want to see Tong get hurt, so he didn't tell her about the diagnosis. Tong is in tears as she reads the letter and finally learns the truth. Her attention shifts to a portrait nearby, and when she turns it around, it is her picture from the first day that Gu Bin saw her. At the end of the movie, we see a firefly in the portrait coming back to life and taking the form of Gu Bin. At this moment, we realize he has already died. Tong sees him and smiles, believing that Gu Bin will always be by her side, no matter where he is.